Hello, my name is Ian Watson, and I am the Executive Director of the American Membrane Technology Association. The interview you're about to see is one of a series in what we call Chats with the Pioneers. AMTA is a technical association founded on the advocacy of the use of membrane technology for water treatment, from wastewater reclamation and reuse to seawater desalination. The heart of this technology is the membrane itself. About 2.5 years ago, our board of directors decided that to preserve the history of the membrane and membrane system development, the association should make an effort to record these chats with those responsible for launching what is now a technology in common use throughout the world. AMTA's intent is to make these segments available on its website so that a new generation of engineers and scientists can understand the efforts of those pioneers who helped solve some of the problems of the water issues facing the world today. I'd like to start this interview by having you introduce yourselves one by one, giving us a little bit about your education, background, and your role within the Permacep group. So I'll start with you, Dan.
Dan Anderson, got a degree in organic chemistry from Ripon College in 1959, PhD from Chicago in 1962, joined DuPont then and spent first part of my career in research, some plant assignments, business analysis, and then landed in Glasgow. Spent 10 years in Permacep. I was the first product manager when we started a product group because the division director liked lots of control and numbers and this and that, and he thought that I could try and help there. So I had that job for a couple of years, and then I became the sales manager for a couple of years. And then we got into fun times, and we started to bid on projects in the Middle East where we would offer up to $80 million worth of permeators from an $18 million business. And our management wanted to know just, how sure was this stuff? So I would gather all the information from guys like Irv and press and everybody, and put together a paper which would say why we should do this. And so that was an exciting time for a couple of years. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bids. Unfortunately, multi-stage flash won most of those huge plants, but it was an exciting time. The technology, I still think it was a marvelous technology. This little hollow human hair did what it did. And then my last couple of years I spent trying to put together a joint venture with some partners in Saudi Arabia to make permeators. We would send them fiber bundles and they would convert them into permeators. The interest in that sort of waned in my last couple of years there, and so after 10 years then I left Permacep and went to Detroit to be an automotive guy.
Thank you. I was remiss in not introducing our guests, Dan Anderson, who just spoke, Press Goodwyn, and Bill Ranson. And Press, perhaps you'd like to give us a little bit about your background?
Okay. BS Chem Engineering, University of Pennsylvania. Joined DuPont in '56. Did a number of assignments before coming to Permacep in 1969. Stayed with them through '92. Quite a few years in product development and field testing, anything related to product improvements and trying to get some better performance and cut costs is a typical scenario. Towards the end of my stay, the business took a turn and started looking at gas separation as well as water separation. I got involved in that. One thing led to another, and a company called Air Liquide bought out our interest in gas separation, and I went with them in '92. So for the bulk of the time, though, principally in product development, field testing.
Good, thank you. Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself.
A master's degree in chemistry from Auburn University. But before I got my degree, I actually had an exposure to the DuPont company. I worked in one of their ordnance plants during the war, making gunpowder, of all things. Then I went back to school, got my degree, taught school for a few years. applied to the DuPont company, started off as a research chemist, and from there I did so many different things I hardly remember them. Permacept was my first assignment as a marketing manager for the world, and there's some interesting experiences that I will get around to soon, I hope. After leaving Permacept, I went into corporate plans. I did other marketing sorts of things. Retired in 1989 after 39 years. My admiration of the DuPont company is boundless.
Thank you. DuPont was probably, with the Permacept separator, B9, was one of the earliest of the RO membrane manufacturers. How did the concept develop, and was it difficult? Perhaps you could describe some of the difficulties you had in actually coming up with the design of the permeator itself.
Press is the only guy who could answer that.
Okay.
Before my time.
Go ahead, Press.
The initial R&D interest was in helium recovery. And one of the chemists there in Jackson Lab got the idea that a hollow fine fiber would be a good way to try and see if they could achieve a separation. So the focus was on gas separations initially, mainly driven by the fact that the government was supporting the price of helium at a very attractive level. No sooner did the limited activity get underway than the government removed the price support and the price of helium plummeted, and the interest in helium separation went with it. And looking for other places to apply the technology, they started switching over to water desalting as an alternative. And so that's more or less the evolution to begin with. I think it was caught up in the interest in desalination that was prevalent at the time, and a big effort was put in the research end of it to try and see if they couldn't improve the membrane performance. One thing led to another, and scale-up began to occur, and commercialization looked possible, and there was what they called at the time a venture created. That was a popular activity in DuPont at the time, and it led to the construction of some manufacturing facilities at the Glasgow site. I think that occurred around 1969, because that's when I moved over from research to the plant at Glasgow. That's kind of a primer on how things got started.
And the first commercial membrane was a B9. And then a few years later on, you commercialized the B10 seawater membrane.
True, yes.
And was that the same fiber, or was that a different fiber?
Chemically, I think it was the same fiber, but there were a number of things done to it to provide the pressure resistance that was required to achieve higher saltwater feeds and accomplish a separation.
But did the OD-ID ratio change, I would presume, to withstand the pressures?
Yeah, true. The structure changed to achieve greater fiber strength, wall strength, and what have you. That's true. Other than that, though, the basic structure, I believe, chemically was the same. There was some post-treatments that were added to achieve the high separation you needed to do the job. It was pretty successful. I did some field testing, or at least worked on some field testing initially at several different sites, and it looked pretty promising. Yeah.
What was the first, maybe you can answer this, Bill, when was the first successful seawater sale? I'm sure.
I had left the business prior to that,
Oh, is
and
that
so
right?
I really cannot.
Okay.
Now, you specified seawater.
Yeah.
Certainly, I was there during the brackish water period.
Right. And what was, so let's ask the same question about brackish water. Because you started off, one of your first licensees, I think, was Bermuda Company.
Yes.
And they did a lot of work in Florida together with Polymetrics.
I think Venice was probably one of our first plants, I think.
Venice was?
I think
Yeah.
one of the early ones.
Again, that was prior to my coming to the business, and I believe that you're right. As far as the marketing is concerned, may I leave your direct question and talk about the marketing of the product. First, decision has to be made how you're going to market. And the decision was made by the DuPont company, and I think it was the correct one, to work with existing water treatment companies that were well established, could do all of the things that DuPont had little experience in, to provide a system to satisfy the customer's needs. We provide the permeators as more or less one of the components of the system. So you mentioned Bermuda, Polymetrics, others. So we decided to ally ourselves with established, competent system manufacturers, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And so that was the general marketing program. Now, finding the system manufacturers that were well established, competent, so forth, wasn't always straightforward. Sometimes it was. So let me tell you of our experience. The name of the game back in those days, water. Who needs water? The Middle East needs water. They have money. You go to the Middle East. So we did a little searching here and there, and we discovered there was a company in Beirut, Lebanon, that seemed to fit them. They were in the Middle East, they knew the language, so forth and so on. The owner of that company was Farouk Gandor. And when we first proposed meeting with Farouk, he sent a message back. I should say parenthetically, his wife was Palestinian. Farouk was suspicious of all Westerners, and his first message back was, "You come over here and I'll drink your blood." That's not the kind of way you'd like to start a relationship. I met Farouk in Athens, and in a couple of days we were friends, and we remained friends. I visited their plant. It was a competent installation outside of Beirut. Then they had a revolution. Marketing point one, don't count on your future sales from countries that are going to have a revolution. Now, knowing when the revolution is coming, that's another issue. That's not mine. So those were some of the interesting experiences in trying to market worldwide a new technology, and it takes a little fancy footwork. You mentioned Venice, Florida. We heard that there was a opportunity, Sanibel Island. They had brackish water as a supply, they needed desalination. So Don Dowd, the salesman responsible, and I went down and we drove around Sanibel. We had an interview with the council the following day, but we wanted to see what Sanibel was like. Don was driving, and in turning around, he knocked down a mailbox that was standing beside the road. Well, being an honorable man, he went up, knocked on the door, identified himself, and said, "Don't worry, I will repair it," which he proceeded to do. The next day, we discovered the owner of the mailbox at the home was the president of the council we didn't get that job. So I think on price and competition had already been there. But the second marketing point,
Don't knock down the
don't knock down your customers' mailboxes. They get irritated.
Yeah, I have a story about Don Dowd. I was doing a study for the state of Montana for the applicant. It was funded by the old Office of Saline Water for applications, possible applications of RO in the state of Montana. But we would drive around a number of these communities, talk to the city fathers and the local water superintendent and so on. Unbeknownst to us, Don Dowd was about half a day behind us. And he had, I don't know if you remember, he had a suitcase. He had a quarter-size element in it that he used to carry around with him. Well, he was demonstrating this to all the people that we just spoken to. And I think that he probably did more to educate them about reverse osmosis than I ever could have done. And they now have, half a dozen or 8 plants, I think, in the state of Montana, all in the communities that we visited.
Don was a remarkable
He
salesman.
sure was. He sure was. You were pretty well established. Permaceps was pretty well established. The folks at Roga were starting to give you a little competition. And there used to be a lot of stories in the weekly desalination newsletter published by Dick Smith on the pros and cons of hollow fine fiber membranes versus flat sheet spiral wound membranes. Did you get involved in any of that discourse at all? Any of you?
Of course, we are extraordinarily interested in a comparison.
Right.
And we're well aware of Roga's advantages and some disadvantages, and you do the best you can.
Yep. Yep.
One of our salesmen, a guy by the name of Bill Bosch, used to try and sell hollow fiber versus cellulose acetate. He said, well, bacteria will eat up cellulose acetate. They have not yet invented the bacteria that will eat up Permacep.
Yeah, that's.
Bill went to work for
Water Services of
America.
Services with Gordon Leitner. Yeah.
That's right. And then they built the plant down in Key West.
Key West, that was one of our early big B10 plants.
Yeah. And that was like a 5-month delivery project or something like that. It was very quick.
It was quick. I don't know if it was that quickly, but yeah.
And that plant was operated for a number of years, and then I think it was split up and parts of it were taken to other locations in the Keys.
Don't know. I was out of the business by then.
Yeah, that was, I think that was about 5, maybe 6 months delivery time, because they'd lost their supply from the mainland. They would desperately
Right.
need of water down there. The B10 was post-treated with PTA and PTB. Were you involved at all in discovering that those two chemicals worked to give you the kind of characteristics you wanted?
The PTA treatment was developed by the chemist in the laboratory, and the PDB treatment was discovered by one of the engineers who was looking at various chemicals there at the Glasgow site, a fellow by the name of Carl Chin. And the combination seemed to be very powerful as far as enhancing rejection that was required to achieve a seawater separation.
At one time, if my memory serves, it was reported maybe by Dick Smith, or certainly in one of the publications, that you had Permacep's group in DuPont had something like 70% market share in the Middle East. And then that started to decline. And when you saw that decline, what sort of reaction was there within DuPont?
Well, I guess that's why we decided to try and have a joint venture there to get increased local content. That was the strategy that we used. And also, we hired a licensee who was local to Saudi Arabia, Al Kauthar, again, to have local presence. So those are the types of things that we did to increase our presence there.
Farooq Gando's company was called Matito.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Right.
he was pretty active in Saudi as well.
Yes, he
Was
was.
he still a licensee of yours at that time?
At that time, yes, he was. Yeah.
What are some of the significant systems that that carried the Permacep's label on the membranes in those days?
Well, I guess the plant in Venezuela, Gaddafi, was one of our large seawater plants. The one that Jack Spencer, Yambu, was that the one in Saudi Arabia? The Key West plant. I'm trying to think of some others. I just can't recall them all. But
What was the largest plant?
One of our largest early plants was the one at Riyadh, capital of Saudi Arabia.
that was a B9 plant.
That was a B9
That was a
plant.
B9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I didn't specify.
Yeah.
Biggest plant. Yeah. And that was what, 15 million gallons a day or something like that?
Well, it was, 50. I mean, there was 12, 13.
It
You know,
was
the
big.
total plants were in the 50s.
And you had a big plant also in Bahrain, I think.
And in Jubail, Saudi Arabia.
Right. Now, when the decision was made to close the doors, you had been working trying to get some licensees to actually make the permeators or assemble the permeators.
Assembled permeator. It
in
wasn't.
Saudi Arabia.
Well, there were two partners. One was E.A. Jafali and Company, one of the largest companies over there involved in all sorts of things, including selling Mercedes-Benz cars and that stuff. And a minor partner was Adel Bushnak from El Khawthar. I think what happened is several projects got canceled, and so the resolve within DuPont to keep pouring money in sort of waned at that time.
And what the concept was that you would make the bundles here?
No,
the
we'd ship
bundles out
fiber. They would make
Just
bundles.
ship fiber?
We'd ship fiber.
Okay.
They would convert them into bundles and put them in the permeator shells. There were lots of things that we probably didn't deal with in depth. Like when you have a plant, you have all this salt water coming out. What the heck do you do with it? And so those were one of the issues that we really didn't quite resolve.
In a previous interview, we learned that perhaps one of the reasons that the product was discontinued was because DuPont wanted to sell the plant where the fiber was manufactured. Is that how you understand it?
I had left the business by the time they were talking like that. The problem I always had with that is it's very tough to sell the middle of a semi-works out in somewhere in West Virginia. And that it just would have been a logistically difficult thing to accomplish. So I never could understand how DuPont could sell the fiber business at Waynesboro.
Right.
Personally, I could not understand that. We could have sold the conversion of fiber into bundles and shells, but Textile Fibers was the ones who were making the fiber, and it again would have been very difficult to control the quality and pass that technology on. That's my belief.
Well, eventually the DuPont company divested themselves of all textile fibers. The decision to abandon the Permacep business, I think, had nothing to do with that divestiture per se. That was more or less happened several years before. Put it one way, DuPont considers itself extremely diversified and is not committed to any one particular product line forever. We started off as an explosive company. We went out of the explosives business quite a number of years ago, and the DuPont company has evolved as time changes occur. So most likely the abandonment of water treatment was simply that there were better uses for resources, manpower, funds at that time and there was adequate representation of the technology in the field, and it was a successful technology to desalt brackish or seawater. And so there was not a vital role for us to play.
Right.
And there was another issue. Perhaps DuPont invested their own money in the development of Permacept. We did not have any government funding to support that. So that was an investment that wasn't wasn't earning what you'd like.
Were any of you at Permacept still when they entered the spiral membrane market?
It was really a marketing strategy to have a full line of products, which was pushed strongly by the business manager at the time, Bob Keller. And there was diversity of opinion among the Permacept management whether that was really the right thing to do. And it was difficult to justify that you could afford that investment with what kind of a market share you're going to get. So I'm not sure how long that, at least the cellulose acetate part, we were developing a Permacept type membrane at the time I left, and I don't know how that worked out. Whether that Irving says that didn't work out well either. Was that called B15 or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
B15. Yeah. Yeah. In early interviews, I think they generally agreed that spending that time and effort on developing a flat sheet approach to membranes probably diluted the research effort into improving the fiber and improving the B9 and B10 membrane.
Yes, and one of the things we were doing was we were competing with our lifelong strategy of saying that, the B9 and the B10 are superior material to cellulose acetate and to spiral wound as far as following the permeators. And so to now embrace those two products sort of went against what had been our strategy for 20 years. That's my view.
One of the interesting competitions that took place was the famous Yuma desalter. And we've interviewed people that worked at Yuma and were part of the pilot plant program on the consulting side. DuPont participated as one of the membrane suppliers for that plant, and when the results came out, it was given to Hydronautics, which at that time was a relative newcomer in the business, and UOP, Fluid Systems.
Yes.
The earlier group we interviewed told us that in their opinion, the pilot testing clearly demonstrated that DuPont had the superior performance. And so, can you tell us what happened there, Press?
Yeah, I wish I could. I don't know. My involvement was that of developing a very large module, which they were very interested in, bigger than anything that we could offer out of our conventional arsenal of products. And so we put together, I think, 2 or 3 of them. Took quite a bit of effort. They were very big modules. I think they were like 15-inch or 14-inch diameter, 2 in a tube sort of a thing. Got the job done, tested out okay, sent them out there, and that's the last I heard of it, really. I don't know. I do recall, though, your comment that when the bidding time came, DuPont lost out to
Yeah, and that precipitated a long lawsuit.
yeah.
Right. Well, that happened about the time that I was coming in the business. And unfortunately, in the bid, very little marketing input was involved. It was very technically and financially protective construction of the bid. And It turns out that the person who was involved in a lot of that had the philosophy of, well, if you build a large skyscraper in New York and you have 100,000 bulbs, you start replacing them on day one. Well, that just inflated the costs way out of sight. And so that was the problem. It was the cost of the huge number of replacement perimeters which were forecast to be needed that would not have really been needed. And that is what killed the bid. That was the problem.
We did your own pilot testing in the field. Did the information you're able to gather allow you to improve the product over time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example. We did some brackish water testing right here in Salem, New Jersey. We had a well there that we tested. And I guess about every month or so we go and check to see how things were going. And one day we discovered that performance had dropped off very significantly. Took the module back to the plant, took it apart, and the whole thing was a solid rock. It was just like a concrete pillar. Analyzed what was in there, turned out to be barium sulfate. Well, just analyzed the water, we could hardly find any barium in it. It turned out to have like 1.5 parts per million barium in it. But over a period of time, operating it the way we were instructed to operate it, it had precipitated out and slowly accumulated in the module. So that led quite a bit of interest in controlling conversion in each module to avoid precipitation of all the components that were in the feed water. We have focused on the typical ones like calcium sulfate and what have you. But these trace element type things could come in and nip you too if you operated outside the boundary. So I think it enlarged our appreciation for how important it was to control conversion in each module. And that in turn got us into the area of staging to accomplish that. And so it was a helpful input from the field, I think, to focus our technical efforts into understanding better how to operate our modules in a successful fashion. So, field testing, yeah, we did it in several locations at various well sites. And in seawater testing, we also had several sites, one in Ocean City, New Jersey, and one in Lewis, Delaware. There's a magnesium extraction plant there, as I recall. If you ever took Malox, that's where the magnesium came from, the Delaware River, or at least the estuary there where the ocean and the river come together. That's what you were drinking when you took Malox. So we tested there and learned an awful lot about the importance of feed water quality control, keeping it clean enough for the foul fine fiber modules to be able to survive without fouling.
Now, were any of you three at Permaset when Dow started manufacturing hollow fiber membranes?
Yeah?
Yeah?
Yeah, they did. They learned a lot of what they did with government money through the OSW.
Right.
So we read a lot of their reports. We learned a lot about how they formed bundles, and some of the techniques that they used seemed very interesting. So we tried to adapt as much as we could to our own uses.
I'd like to add a little bit to what Press was saying about what we learned from the field testing. I think that changed our emphasis, so pre-treatment became a big part of what we study in depth. And Lynn Applegate became the pre-treatment expert of the world, actually. And under Irv's guidance, we put together manuals that went into details of how to use the pre-treatment to insure against those sorts of things. So that became a part of the technology as opposed to just turning on the valve and letting the water squirt.
Yeah. But I was talking to Doug earlier about, if ultrafiltration had been around in the days when you were working on seawater elements, it perhaps would have given you a better position in the marketplace in terms of fouling and performance decline.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Could be.
Let me ask you the $64,000 question. you ever have any regrets that you, for at least a short time in your careers at DuPont, worked in the Permaceps division?
One of the most exciting times of my life. And some of the stories we could tell, which I do not want recorded, are just absolutely incredible, the things that went on. But
Well, you could tell us at lunch.
I don't know. No, I wouldn't have traded those 10 years for anything.
What about you, Press?
No, I don't think so. And I agree with Dan. It was very exciting. Yeah, no question.
Yeah, one of the most exciting things to me was visiting places I never would have gone before and wouldn't go again right now, such as Iran. That's another example of where look out for revolutions. I was there shortly before the hostages were taken in the embassy and held for 444 days, and the Shah was still in power. Things were fairly quiet and comfortable, but
The thing that I always felt that set Permasip apart, and even though I wasn't really involved in the technology, more financial planning stuff, was, we sell plastics, they mold stuff, big deal. Fibers, they weave rugs. This is a hollow fiber with an OD to ID ratio of a heavy wall vessel. Separates seawater. I mean, just to be able to do that was incredible to me. And every day I went to work, I thought, boy, this is wonderful.
Is there anything you'd like to add as a closing remark, Dan?
Being involved in actually negotiating the contract with Water Services that resulted in the Key West plant, and then taking our general manager, who didn't really understand our business at all, down there, and converting him into a Permasep fan because he played golf with Gordon Leitner. And years later, when we were making these humongous bids in Saudi Arabia, Water Services was making a bid, and they needed to reduce their price from $20 million to $15 million. A big chunk of money. And so we had to go in and see this general manager who was dying at the time. And it's a guy who didn't trust anybody. And I explained to him that, what was needed, and they needed a response by 11 o'clock in the morning, blah, blah, blah. This is for my friend Gordon Leitner? Yes. Give me a piece of paper. He signed his name on a piece of paper, and he said, Dan, make sure what you're putting the words are right. So that was probably one of the high points of making that happen. But again, it was the marketing and the customer focus.
Well, you had to have a good relationship with your licensees.
Yes,
Otherwise,
we had an excellent one with the Water Services. Yep.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to add as a closing remark?
Well, there was a little story about one of the early membranes that we created. The very first large brackish water installation occurred at Plains, Texas. And it was a barrier that we later on abandoned for better performance membranes. And the story, I didn't go down there, but the story goes that this is a fairly significant plant. It had I think 12 rather large modules in it. Most small towns in Texas have very brackish water. I don't even know how they exist down there, but 2,000 or 3,000 part per million feed water is very common there. In any event, to offset that, they throw a lot of soap in their wash water and what have you. And so does the laundromats and what have you in town. And Plains wasn't a very big town. So one day, though, the papers announced that the plant was going to start up and provide much better quality water. And so they turned the plant on, and it was a significant hunk of the water supply for Plains, Texas. It was maybe 3/4 of it. And out comes this very low TDS water, and it hit all these laundromats, and suds began to occur, and it overflowed all the washing machines, and the floor was covered with suds, and they started calling up the mayor saying, Mayor, we can't handle this anymore. We're out of our mind here with all these soap suds. What's going on here? And he explained to them what had happened. We've now improved your water quality. You got to cut back on the soap and the softener that you're putting in there and what have you. Things are changing. And they said, well, I guess that's for the better. And they did so, but after a massive cleanup effort at all these laundromats that were suffering. Just a small story.
Bill?
My most memorable experience was landing in Saudi Arabia in the evening through a mix-up, no hotel reservation. So I go find a taxi, take me to a good hotel. The Al Ghasabi was his recommendation. So he took me to the Al Ghasabi. I walk up to the clerk. My name is William Ranson. I have a reservation. Positive approach. I'm sorry, Mr. Ranson, no reservation. Now, I should say parenthetically, DuPont had strict regulations about bribery. So, thank you. I went back to the taxi that I'd said, don't leave, stay here. Take me to the next hotel, which he did. Walked in, looked around, I'm not staying here. Back to the taxi, to the El Ghasabi, walk up to the desk. You do have a room or a coat closet, someplace for me to stay. Sorry. I was peering over the edge of the desk and saw my name. The blankety blank would have found it the first time if I had given him $20. Now, would the DuPont company have forgiven me for a $20 bribe? Well, you can never imagine how lonely and helpless I felt. Strange country.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning for this. It's been interesting, and I look forward to hearing the stories you're not prepared to put on the tape. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.